Hey everyone, it's Caleb. I hope you're all doing pretty well, being safe and isolated at home. I trust that you're all keeping up with what we're doing and going through John. So today I'm going to be going through John chapter 8 and just kind of looking at the key sections in this chapter. So the chapter starts with a story. And the interesting thing about the story is it's actually not in some of the earliest manuscripts that we have to make our Bibles off of. And so people think that it might have been added in a little bit later, but I think the story is still really relevant, regardless of whether or not it was added in later or whether or not it was in the original manuscripts. So the story is of a woman, and she's caught in adultery. And the Pharisees, they want to stone her because of the sin that they caught her in. And basically, Jesus just meets them there, and he tells them that whoever's the first one without sin, let him be the one to throw the first stone. And it's really cool because they slowly, starting with the oldest, walk away because they realize that they themselves have sinned as well. And eventually, the woman's left with Jesus. And Jesus tells her, "Did anyone condemn you?" And she says, "No one." And he says, "Go and sin no more." So that's really cool. And the second part, that was verses 1 through 8. The second part is verses 12 through 30. And this part starts with Jesus saying that I am the light of the world. Throughout John, Jesus has a bunch of I am statements. And this one's pretty cool. He says, I am the light of the world, and whoever follows me will not walk in darkness. So he's kind of making the contrast and saying that the Pharisees, who he was just talking to, that they're not following him because they themselves are condemning people who have sinned while being in sin themselves. And he says that the only one who is able to judge is him because he's been sent by the Father. And he says that if you knew him, then you would also know the Father. And so he tells us that unless we believe in him, he tells them unless they believe in him, they will die in their sin. So the next part, 31 to 38, this is the part that stood out to me the most. And in this passage, Jesus is talking to his disciples, and he says to them, if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free. And so I think that part's really cool, because then he goes on and explains that everyone who practices sin, they're a slave to sin, but if the Son sets you free, then you are free indeed. And I think of this song, Who You Say I Am, which is one that we do with the youth group. And it just talks about who the Son sets free, they're free indeed. And it comes directly from this passage. And it's just so cool for us to be able to know that when we're following the word of Jesus and we're listening to it, then we are set free from our sin. The next passage in this chapter is verses 39 through 47. And in this part, Jesus is just basically talking to the Pharisees, and he says to them that if they were following God, they would love him. But they're actually following the devil because they don't love him and they don't love others. He says that they had said previously that Abraham is their father, and he says Abraham's not your father. Your father is the devil. So he really just calls them out and is a little bit savage, to be honest. He is just telling the religious leaders that no, you're not the father. Your father isn't Abraham. Your father isn't God. Your father is the devil. You are following the devil. And so that part was probably pretty hard for the Pharisees to hear. And Jesus actually says something even more revolutionary after that in verses 48 through 59, which is the end of the chapter. He talks about how not only is Abraham not their father, but he was before Abraham. And in doing that, he basically just claims that he is God. He's saying that I am God. I was before Abraham, and that he's just saying that if I glorify myself, I'm glorifying the Father because I am God, which is really interesting. And so this chapter is kind of mentions three different key points. It talks about the people who are not following Jesus and how they're actually following the devil. And if they're living in sin, then they're also going to die in sin. And then the second part, it talks about people who follow Jesus and love him, and that they love the people around them. And if they're following Jesus, then they will know the truth, and the truth will set them free from sin. And they will not die, but they'll have eternal life, which is something else that he mentions in this chapter. And then thirdly, Jesus talks about himself. And he says that he is the light of the world. He says that he is the one who's able to give eternal life. And he says that he's the one who's able to set people free from sin, which he shows when he forgives the woman caught in adultery for her sin. And then lastly, but most importantly, he claims that he's God, which means that he has the power and the authority of God, which leaves us with a choice. We can either follow him or we can turn away from him. And that choice really depends on if we want eternal life or if we want death, which is a pretty big choice. But I think that it's the choice that John's presenting us as the key choice that we need to be aware of. We need to be aware of the fact that in choosing to follow Jesus, we're choosing to be set free and to have life. And in choosing to not follow Jesus, we're choosing to remain in sin and we're choosing death. And so that's just something that I found really interesting to think about. I hope that you're all well right now. So I'm going to say a quick prayer because of the current situation. Dear God, I pray for everyone who's at home right now and everyone who is currently scared because of the virus going around. Lord, I just pray that you would work miracles and that you would cause the spreading of this virus to decrease rapidly. You cause there to be significantly less death going forward. Lord, I pray that for those of us who are choosing to follow you, that you would continue to allow us to love you, to love others, and to follow you and to know your word and to be abiding in your word. And Lord, for those who don't know you yet, I just pray that you would allow them to get to know you, and that they would choose to follow you and to have eternal life. In your name we pray. Amen.